Good evening, folks. My name is Liam Hurley. We're going to start this presentation, this forum tonight. I just want to do a quick introduction. I'm going to pass this mic around to my colleagues here tonight. So very thankful to have you all tonight on this occasion to give you an update on the FY24 situation, talk about the override, and a chance for you all to ask some questions. So again, I'm Liam Hurley. I'm the Assistant Superintendent, Chief Financial and Administrative Officer. I'm going to pass this around to everyone.
Good evening. I'm Toby Romer. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education in the Newton Public Schools.
Good evening. Renee McCall, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Hi, everyone. Aisha Farag, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education.
Hi, everyone. Ruth Ann Fuller, privileged to be mayor here in Newton.
And I'm Kathy Smith. I'm the interim superintendent this year for the Newton Public Schools.
Thanks, everyone. So this is a real small group, so this is a nice chance for us to be intimate, ask as many questions as you guys want to ask of us. We have a brief presentation here. A lot of these slides, if you've been following, we've actually been presenting these. So we're going to go through these slides and then just open this up. There are some microphones here that you all, the mayor's got something more to say.
Can you just acknowledge Chris Bresky?
Yes, thank you. Chris is in the audience. One of our school committee members is here in the audience. Thanks, Chris, for being here. We appreciate it. So tonight, folks, we want to give you a little budget review. That's on the Newton Public Schools budget. We're also going to talk about some of our budget goals for FY24. When you hear me talk about FY24, that means fiscal year 24, which is the next school year, which really starts on July 1st of 2023 and ends June 30th of 2024. So that's the fiscal year. The 24, it always ends on the last part of it. So that's what FY24 means. And we're currently in fiscal year 23 right now. We're then going to talk about some of the budget drivers that we are experiencing, and many other districts are experiencing the same things. We're going to talk about the proposed budget reductions without additional funding, and then to give a little override context, and then open this on up. So again, this is just a brief overview. Our interim superintendent, Kathy Smith, is also going to be she and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation tonight. So Kathy, in terms of just kind of a budget goal for us, I think you're going to kind of lay that out.
Thanks, Liam. Certainly the goal of any budget is to support, and especially being the superintendent, my job is to inform the school committee what it takes to educate our students in the Newton Public Schools. What is very clear to us this year is in the FY24 budget, our goal is to maintain the current level of services that we provide to our students and then build a sustainable budget over time. I do want to say here that I think many of you are aware that looking back last year during the budget time, there was some opportunity and some struggle with trying to meet our budget goals. And there were some reductions, so I think it's clear this year that we were able to build back some of that budget. Thank you to the city, to the mayor, to our team. So this year it is critical when we say to maintain those services. And before we even get into the presentation, I don't think I have to tell this audience of what all of us have experienced the past 3 years. So when you think about our students, and it's so great to be at Newton North High School, because coming here, and especially this year, and although I retired as a superintendent in 2019 and have been working as an interim superintendent supporting districts to come and to actually see the students performing on stage, to actually see them on the fields with athletics, extracurricular activities, excuse me, roaming the halls of the school, and just being students. So when you think about that, please put the students in the center of everything we're discussing tonight, because they have faced challenges these past 3 years. And I say this whenever I have an opportunity to speak, that it really is incumbent upon us to support this generation of students who are still coming out of a very challenging time during the pandemic. So what does it mean? What are our budget goals? So very quickly, when you look at supporting our system-wide goals, we are looking to provide optimal class sizes at all grade levels and adjusted for current enrollment. And what's critical about that statement, and I also tell this story everywhere I go, having been a superintendent in the Brockton Public Schools, I fought for years for equitable funding. We rely on state funding. And what I tell people is I would look at districts like Newton. I would study you. I would look at what your optimal class sizes were. I would look at what your extracurriculars were, what your resources were, the courses, the depth and the breadth of what you were able to offer to your students. And I will tell you, I was in state house offices, the Senate President's office, Speaker of the House, Attorney General, who is now our governor, and we would advocate and talk about what those opportunities were. So when I talk about being here and walking into a classroom and looking at a kindergarten class of sometimes 17 or 18 little kids, supported by a teacher, a teaching assistant, extra support staff, those are the type of things when we talk about supporting this generation of students, that is what we need in our classes. So continue your educational programming, your academics, extracurricular, the resources. You were a district, and I talk to the mayor about this often when we look at the last override 10 years ago. There was an infusion of dollars, and over that time, a number of things happened. You were good stewards of those dollars. You were way ahead of your time looking at technology. You had a report back then that said we need to get to more one-to-one technology. State-of-the-art technology in the classrooms for your teachers and your students. You had started to do that. When the pandemic hit, and this was everywhere, we had to very quickly rush to make sure that we had one-to-one devices for all of our students so they actually could access their academic programming. So we want to continue along that line, and we'll talk a little bit as we go on with how we did that the past 3 years. But it's critical that we keep our foot on the pedal and continue to provide those resources. So this is the one, the rich and diverse mental health supports and social and emotional learning that is critical to this pandemic recovery. There is not an article that is coming out in educational journals, and it is talking, and I clearly, last Friday we were at the Ward School, and it was interesting to watch a parent sit there and say, our children need to make sure that we continue these supports. She said it isn't just the children, it's the parents, it's the families, it's the staff. All of us are dealing with what it has felt like supporting our students, making sure that, and I talk about a student who may become dysregulated, weren't used to the routines in a classroom. No more are they just taken out of the classroom. They work with a social and emotional interventionist, making sure that we can support that classroom teacher so that that student gets back in that classroom and is prepared for learning. So these are the type of things. And I'm going to tell you, it was difficult. I've spoken to superintendents all over. And to make sure that we were hiring psychologists, making sure that we were hiring social workers, school adjustment counselors, guidance counselors. You started the school year with those positions filled. So you have done an excellent job. Could we use more? We certainly could. But we are there to work with our students to make sure they're well adjusted and to have every educational opportunity available to them. And last is supporting our staff through meaningful professional development. I have my staff here. I have our DEI director, Kathy Lopes, right down here, and we will tell you, when I came to your district and looked at the professional development that you are providing, making sure that your children belong, that it's an inclusive environment. So we are doing these very things to make sure, again, that these students have every opportunity, and we want to continue with these types of professional development. And I'll say one more thing about your staff. We did a presentation to the school committee, I want to say early January, I believe. And one of the things we talked about was looking, and we're seeing cracks, I think, Liam, that's the term you and I have used, where there could be a teacher shortage. I can't believe after 45 years in education I'm actually saying that. But we were able to make sure, as I started to say, staff all of our classrooms throughout the district. There are some positions, that we continue to struggle. We are, again, looking to make sure that we have teacher assistants in our classes for students that need the additional support. So I say that you actually have a retention rate for your teachers and your staff of 90%. 90%, because you provide a competitive wage and you provide those professional development opportunities. They come here, your teachers are respected, they're valued, strong leadership throughout your district. So those are the kinds of things we want to make sure that we continue to do. So this is an important slide when you look at the growing student needs. And again, we did a presentation this past Monday evening. So these are things you can actually go and see. So that would have been February 6th. And one of the presentations was, and it really represented all your elementary schools. And it was School Anger, I believe. And we had a second grade teacher, we had the principal presenting, we had a math coach, we had a social and emotional learning interventionist, and we had a literacy coach. I think those were the members we had there. And they talked about looking at the different tiers of instruction to make sure if a student needs extra support to bridge a gap, to make sure if they had any learning loss during the pandemic, that we are right there to assess, to provide the services, or that student that is soaring and needs that additional support. And talked all about the data, spoke about what we were doing, for those students. You heard me talk about the social and emotional learning. So we have growing student needs. This isn't the time, again, for us to be talking about a reduction in the budget. Let me be clear. You saw on the other side, and you will hear talking about certainly our enrollment, and this is happening everywhere. Our enrollment is down in some places. Interesting, in Newton North High School, it is up a little bit. So I think we're seeing that in both our high schools. So we do make those adjustments, but for the very types of positions that I'm sharing with you, those are the things that we continue to need to support our principals, to support our classroom teachers and all of our students. Rising cost and expenses. So Liam, I know you're going to be able to talk about this a little bit more in depth, but like all of us out there, whether you're looking at utilities, the cost of utilities, whether we're looking at transportation, whether we're looking at health costs. So we're happy to, not happy to, but we certainly can go into this with a little more depth. But that is something that, again, is really a driver of our budget and the concerns we have moving forward. And the last is using one-time funds. And Mayor Fuller, I can remember coming here, and one of the first things that you talked about were the opera funds that the mayor, again, has used for so many things to keep the city of Newton really moving during the pandemic as best we could, supporting families, supporting students, supporting the city as a whole. And we were the beneficiaries of many of those funds. Some of it was, it's called ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and Liam, I know you're going to go into a little bit more detail, the CARES Act. So we saw our government come together, state government, federal government, saying we need to get our kids into school, whether it's virtual learning, whether it's hybrid learning. How do we make sure that they have an educational experience that is safe and allows them to continue their education? So using those funds, those are starting to go away as we understood. So when you, and again, I talk to superintendents all over. So when you are able to hire additional staff, or you're able to, with technology, many of those monies and the things that we use them for, we want to continue to be able to provide that support. So this is a great quote. I'm not going to read it to you, but we asked for testimonials. We reached out to our principals, and I say this everywhere I go. And I'm so pleased I'll be able to say this not only to the audience. You have excellent, excellent leadership in this district. Your principals are second to none. I have enjoyed working with them. I understand they have strong relationships with their families. They know every one of their students, and they are there to continue to support their staff. So I have a few principals in the audience. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And I have a fabulous staff with my central staff for the Newton Public Schools. So one of the testimonials is, and I'm going to pull out, the need is above what I have seen in 20 plus years in education. 20 plus years in education. Next slide. And Liam, I'm going to hand this over to you for a few minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. And good evening to some of the folks that just joined us. We're going to be going through a few more slides and then going to open this up to some questions. So this really talks about some of the expense drivers on the expense side that we're experiencing, and many other districts are experiencing this, and I can get into a little more depth with this if you want. One of the things that Newton does, along with all public schools, is we actually, when we can't educate our students in district, they actually go to an out-of-district school. Those out-of-district schools, the rate is set by the group in the government called Operational Services Division. The typical rate increase that we've experienced the last 13 years has ranged from 1 to 3%. For next year, FY24, they've set that rate increase at 14%. Our out-of-district tuition line item is actually our largest expense line item at a gross tuition rate of about $13.3 million. So if all of those schools go up by 14%, we're looking at approximately a $1.8 million increase in our budget in FY24. This gets a little bit complicated going forward. We also get money back from the state through something called the Circuit Breaker Reimbursement Program. It reimburses districts for something. Once it trips beyond a certain threshold, it gives you 75% of that money back. That money is trailing by 1 year. So we are certainly facing a bit of an issue for FY24. Other districts are experiencing the same issue. It is really a budget buster for Newton and many, many other districts. We can talk a little bit more about that one. Health insurance. Newton Public Schools is part of the City of Newton's health insurance. The rate is going up 5% for us. The city is actually going out to bid, and it's going to be getting quotes and working with a consultant looking to see how competitive and what we can do. You know, as you may know, education, healthcare right now is certainly an area where there's increased needs in hospitals for staffing, for nurses, for equipment. So it's a very challenging business. Health insurance is a big portion of the Newton Public Schools budget. It's almost $35 million in our budget alone. That going up at 5% would represent, along with a few other benefits we've got in there, including OPEB, Medicare, dental insurance, going up almost $1.7 million. Van transportation. This is transportation that we provide to students whose IEP, individual education plan, requires that they have van transportation in the city, and we even transport to schools outside of the district. We had to go out to bid. Our contract was up after 3 years. We went out to bid. We're expecting these contracts, the bids to come in between 7 to 10% increase. Again, that would be approximately $500,000. We still don't have these bids back in. That's with the procurement process that we follow with the city. We go out and ask anyone to bid. There's typically only a few vendors that bid. Our current vendor in city is a company called JSC. Our out-of-district provider is a company called Mass Quality Rides. They do a good job. I think Kathy talked about this. This is an area where, and you can see this on almost all vans and trucks and buses right now, they could use drivers and van drivers. There's a shortage in that area right now. And then lastly, gas and electric utilities. Looking at potentially a 22% increase. The supply rate, which is just one piece of the gas component for us next year, is potentially a 70% increase alone in the gas supply rate. There's also delivery rate, which we don't expect to be such an increase, but that supply rate we're thinking is going up significantly. Our usage during the pandemic, when buildings were closed or we were in half, we had really closed things down. Then we went into this ventilation action plan. We've actually had to have all our buildings kind of running and full. We're looking at a potentially $1.1 million increase in our utility budget for next year. So we've got some significant kind of expense drivers that we're looking at next year. These again, some of these are some of these items: health, van, utilities, and the out-of-district tuition. Those are our three largest kind of expense line items, just in terms of single lump sum items. So in terms of thinking about some reductions, kind of how we process and think about how are we going to make some of these reductions, one of the first things we would think about is what can we do just on the non-personnel side. So most of our budget is personnel. We're approximately 89% of our costs are staffing, and that's so salaries and basically benefits. But before we obviously would want to touch any staff, we'd want to look at any expense line items that we could reduce to find any savings before we wanted to touch any personnel. So that'd be kind of an item, a priority list. We then would certainly look at any administrative and operation pieces that we could either reduce or make reductions to before we got to the classroom. You can see the classroom is last there. Extracurricular activities, again, these are things that we would not want to touch, but these are things that we may need to look at, including athletics, fine arts, and clubs. And then lastly, classroom and school personnel. Given the magnitude of the reductions, if this override does not pass, we believe we need to hit all of these categories. Kathy mentioned the use of one-time funds. So we've been very, very fortunate, and the mayor has supported us with one-time fundings, and the school department has actually received direct one-time fundings in the use of a combination of things. We've had ESSER 1 and 2 funds. We've used that. We're now on what's called ESSER 3 funding. We have approximately $1.1 million this year and another $1.1 million next year. That will be going away, though, and we need to do something for FY25. We currently have 1.5 FTE on the ESSER grant, which I'm really proud of. Many districts put more staff on that. We then will need to figure out what to do with those staffing, and we certainly want to keep that staffing in the FY25 budget. But we have been relying on the CARES Act money, ARPA money, ESSER, which stands for Elementary Secondary Emergency Relief Act funding. That's what that stands for. And then something called Carry Forward Reliance. You heard me before talk about Circuit Breaker. That's that state program that reimburses districts for high-cost special education. We have an account called a Carry Forward. It's actually called the Circuit Breaker account. We are allowed by law to carry forward a year's worth of Circuit Breaker funding in that. We have been relying on that basically as kind of one-time money that up to the tune of $4.6 million to basically help us balance the following year's budget. It's allowed, but it is really not a great way for a district to manage its resources using one-time money to fund ongoing operations. We've been doing it, and I think for FY24, we will look at some type of carry forward. But this override certainly is going to help us with basically not having to rely as much on that carry forward.
Can you go back a slide?
Sure thing.
Thanks, Liam. The one thing that I just want to make clear, and we are busy at work. So Toby and Aisha are working with principals across the district. Renee is working with department heads. And we are looking at all of these areas. I don't want to confuse people. When you look at extracurricular activities, fine arts, clubs, it's not a total elimination. We are looking to be very careful. Is it a reduction? So if it comes to, and can I say even before we go on, I am very hopeful, and that is why we are out presenting. I'm optimistic, and we have a lot of work to do. If the override is able to be passed, we would have a small deficit when you talk about a $71 million budget. But, and that's the work that we're doing right now, trying to keep things away from the classroom as much as possible. So you look for efficiencies. You look for things that maybe you could do without. You look for actually having less of something. So I don't want you to think when you look at this, we're not trying to be dramatic. We're trying to tell you the work that we are doing, making sure everybody can make informed choices. And again, understand that we're looking everything from administrative positions, which becomes extra work for those people kind of left behind. And I've done this, believe me. When you look at, even when you hear us say athletics or extracurricular, it's looking at some clubs. And you say, how well is this attended? And honestly, when you make those kind of reductions, let's just say to a club, there are some students, then that's their interest. Maybe there are only 5 students taking part in that. But for those 5 students, that's important during their career. So please understand, it's not, eliminating, all athletics or fine arts. It is a reduction. So we're doing this work to make sure that when we are working very closely with our school committee, and presenting, as I told you, I started by saying the superintendent's job by law in the state of Massachusetts is to make sure that we let the school committee know what it takes to run a district, and then unfortunately we have to provide a balanced budget. So we are doing this work and taking this very seriously.
Thanks, Kathy. So just, this is again, this use of one-time funding. I would just mention, just during the pandemic, and we were really, really fortunate again with the city, we ended up spending close to $5 million on what was called the Ventilation Action Plan. We needed to bring in engineers, we needed to bring in consultants to basically go look and do airflow testing to basically make sure that every space in every school was meeting what's called ASHRAE standards, ASHRAE 62 standards. I got to know this information really, really very well. We put up dashboards, and if we were deficient, we would go back and we would make changes or actually add, potentially add parts. We would get the vendor back in. Josh Morse, Public Building Commissioner, and David Stickney really, owe a debt of gratitude towards that. We end up doing almost 5 different testing programs for COVID during this time. So we were doing our testing for our staff and our students, so that the uses that we had for all this one-time money was unbelievable. What we did and what the staff did to make this district run. This is an override slide that's actually we've taken from the mayor's office here, and this is really the override that's on the ballot for March 14th. There's 3 questions, and if I get any of this wrong, the mayor is going to correct me, and there may be some specific questions that I'm sure that she'll be able to answer as well. The blue size slides here are the debt exclusion questions. These are for our 2 building projects. One is the Countryside Elementary School at $2.3 million, and one is the Franklin Elementary School at $3.5 million. There's a difference in the pricing on these ones because of the Mass School Building Authority. So if you hear the term MSBA, that stands for Mass School Building Authority. We have been awarded right now to enter into feasibility with the Mass School Building Authority, with Countryside, and they partner with districts, and for Newton that would mean approximately 25 to 30% of the total eligible project costs would be reimbursed by the Mass School Building Authority. So these 2 projects right now are estimated to actually cost about the same amount of dollars, but because we would be getting that reimbursement amount from the Mass School Building, the difference in the amount that would need to come out of this debt exclusion is less for Countryside because that's in the Mass School Building Authority. So I hope that part is clear on the 2 debt exclusions. Then there's this operating piece here on the green side. The circled items are specifically related to the school, in the part that we've been talking about is this lower section, the $4.5 million, but in that is also money for Horace Mann Elementary School to do a major renovation addition to the building. What I think a couple of big points that I'd like to point out is even within this green section, there are pieces that the mayor is really focused on, and I know it. I actually bicycle from Needham here. Our streets and sidewalks, and I feel those bumps. Our parks, our fields and courts. Many of those parks, fields, and courts are on school property and school grounds. The schools get the benefit of investment and continued maintenance. Planting and naturing trees, to talk a lot about street trees. Sustainability and climate resiliency. This would be another area where the schools would be a beneficiary. They're looking at the Pierce building, which is our last school on oil. The city and Josh is committed to electrifying its buildings. This would be taking out an old oil boiler system and looking to make the building completely electric. Supporting our senior services programs that we've got, this great new programming that's going to be going on there. And then I've certainly talked about the 4.5. So in total, all this funding would be, almost 75% of this funding is directed towards Newton Public Schools. So I hope that piece is clear in terms of the support that would be coming to us. 3 questions again, the 2 debt exclusion, and then all these pieces on the 1 operational override. So I'm going to just look to the mayor to see if I got anything wrong. She can correct me if I got any of that. We're okay. She's giving me the thumbs up. So again, we're going to open this up to questions shortly, so we can come back to this slide if there are further questions. This slide right here, Kathy, I don't know if you want to just mention this slide.
Yes, this has again been an education for me coming here these past 7 months. And it is pretty daunting to look at because I hear all the time, comparable districts. So, Weston, Wellesley, Needham, districts that surround us, districts that are high performing, like the Newton Public Schools. And one of the things that jumps out at us, if you look at the number of overrides, you look at Weston from 2000 to 2022. There have been 22 overrides, and you can look, you can go up and see Wellesley 14, Wayland 12, Needham I think 11, Lexington 9, and you look at Newton, which is circled up there, and I believe you have had 2 overrides, the override in 2002 is it, and the override in 2013. So it has been 10 years. I think all of you know, I don't think we have to educate. I'm looking at this audience. People have been around a while. And Prop 2.5 is the mechanism, for adjusting, your budget over time. It limits taxes for probably very good reasons. But at times we have to take a look at that to make sure, and I've been using this term, you are a premier district. And we want to continue to be that premier district for our students and our families.
Thanks, Kathy. I just would point out, I live in Needham, and when I see this slide, I do cringe. I've been in Needham since 2003, and so I do feel I have every couple of years, I am going back to the booth there. So it's real. Kathy, in terms of this, yeah.
And I think to finish up, so I hope what you've been able to gather, even from this short amount of time, is we are really proud, and we want to maintain strong, challenging, and engaging academic programs. You have what we call neighborhood schools and school communities that are welcoming and inclusive, and I'm seeing that everywhere I go. You know, parents coming in telling us they attended the school, or their children have attended and have gone on to the middle and the high school. People come here, they move here for these reasons. Robust and meaningful mental health supports, and again, I hope I've been able to share with you not only the need, but a focus that you had before the pandemic. You've increased those supports, and we are proud of being able to work with our families. And if any of you have, you know, been, again, reading or hearing, you know, the wait list for somebody that wants to have any type of counseling is, you know, months out. So to be able to have the support we also have with the city, I believe with Interface, you know, we're working together as a community, as a school community. And the one thing, and the last one there, is the modern, innovative, readily accessible technology. So can I say this as an educator? In looking at what happened during the pandemic, we were well poised to do everything that we could, because we were the place that families came to make sure children were supported, whether they needed therapies or speech or all of those services. We jumped in. We had a presentation the other night about fine arts, and here they were performing outside or using certain instruments that we were allowed to use. You know, our integrated fine arts program. You know, we really met the challenge, and although it was difficult, we tried to make sure that our students had some opportunities. They knew we were there. We were there feeding kids. We were there testing. You know, Liam, you and I have had conversations. I think you were out doing testing. So, you know, we were doing everything, and we should have been. This is exactly, and when you talk about your welcoming and inclusive, your neighborhood schools, to this day, that is who your families are trusting. And we are trusting at this point that the community is going to come together. Please, you know, share this information, and, you know, hopefully we can support our students.
So I think at this point, we wanted to open this up to anybody. I can walk around, hand somebody the, Toby's happy to volunteer. He's, and there's a microphone down there. So Toby's going to thankfully be the volunteer. So if anyone's got a question, anything at all, I think we're prepared here with us up here to answer questions, anything to the mayor.
And it helps us if you have a question, because, so if you're thinking of it, because thank you, New TV. So this is being live streamed. So, you know, the best interaction we've had, I want you all to know that you have a practice. Dr. Fleischman started this, I think, a number of years ago, where we, with the PTOs, go to the schools and actually, you know, talk to the parents, you know, a coffee with the parents, and really hear some of the questions they have about education in Newton, about their schools, things they want. So this engagement in person with families has really been critical. So we have been out to, I think, over 15 schools right now, and we'll continue until we're out at all 21. So again, thank you, but you know, please, would love to have questions.
Thank you. I have a question, or actually it's an observation, I guess. You know, it's unclear to me just how much the trauma of COVID has factored into all the budget issues in the city. The last 3 years, you know, there's $5 million for ventilation, there's extra support staff, there's mental health, there's a whole long list of things. If you could put a number on that, it would really be helpful to understand it a little better. It's a very complicated situation between the debt exclusion and the override for the public to get their hands around. But I think if you just said COVID has been a real problem for the city and we have to pay the piper, I think it's much more understandable from that standpoint.
Sure. I mean, if you're asking me to put a number on COVID, that would be difficult to do. We have been the beneficiary, and I've got to go back on some of the tables, and I want to thank Chris Bresky has done a nice job saying, let's kind of quantify this. We had tabled upwards of, I want to say, in the $20 to $22 million over several years of what we were kind of calling directly attributable to COVID. That was the range. That was over a kind of a 3-year period. That had a combination of things from testing, ventilation, furniture moves that we needed to make, additional staff that we needed to hire during a time when we were in a hybrid model that we were kind of a short-term staff that we then did not return back, but we had staff that we needed to cover during that time. We needed to get additional substitute coverage as well if staff were absent. It's a really difficult question to kind of answer. I think the other very, very difficult question to answer is what is the long-term 5-10 years impact of COVID in terms of learning loss, and how are we trying to manage that? And that's why I think the dollars, this $4.5 million for us to maintain those services are critical. But we had kind of pegged a number in that $20 to $22 million range. And a lot of that also was support from the mayor and ARPA funding that they had given to us as well. So that was the approximate range. During that time, during COVID, when COVID hit, our budget, though, we have stayed within. We actually were going to expect to have a 3.5%. When COVID hit, there was also a lot of revenue loss for the city as well as the school department. When I say revenue loss, we get money for fees, transportation, we get money for the food service programs. We were out here at Newton North handing out food in this 2 and 3 days a week, as well as 150 Jackson, as well as Newton South. We ran that for 2+ years, having food. Our food service vendor, Whitson's, was here providing food to the community. So the number of the number of things that COVID impacted was everything from food to mental health to academic. Specific numbers, as I said, was kind of the low $20 million range, but really, really a hard number to actually pin down. Our budget during when it hit in March 13th, we actually reduced our budget to 2.8%. The following year, we made that amount of money back, and I think it was about a 4.1. But we've lived within our allocation we've had from the city. The operating dollars that we've received from the city, but that use of all that ARPA, CARES, ESSER funding has really, really been a lifesaver for Newton and many, many other districts.
If I could build on that for one sec.
Could we make sure we're talking a little bit louder, or participant?
I'll try. Is this a little better for you? Good. All this information is on the city website. I can email me, I'll tell you exactly how to get it. We had to turn into the feds recently what our lost revenue is. So far, it's been $69 million in losses. That's a combination of school and city losses. Thank goodness we had the CARES fund, that $5 million in ventilation. That was CARES funding that came to the city. We quickly raised our hand and worked with NPS and sent the $5 million over to redo the ventilation systems. We've put millions and millions and millions of dollars in the ARPA funds directly towards our student needs. It's easy to quantify the losses, and we have a very clear accounting of all the ESSER funds, CARES fund, ARPA funds, and we actually even initially got like $1 million of FEMA funds. So it's all detailed on the website. I can send you right there, and that will tell you where the funds got spent and added to.
59 million total or per year?
69 million total that'd be FY 21-22. We don't know FY23 totals. Oh, we might have that in there at this point. We do have the FY20. We've got calendar year 2022, but we're still in FY 2023.
I had a couple of questions and then a brief statement. So the one question is, you had the chart up there with the two sides, and one side was the debt exclusion. You may have talked about that, but I don't have a clue what debt exclusion means. So it talks about Franklin Elementary there, $3.5 million. Does that mean you're going to put up a new school and it's excluded from being in debt? Does it mean that you can't have debt on it? I don't understand what debt exclusion means.
How about I answer that one first, and then we'll have you do your comment? Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Great question, and it is such technical terminology that I'm so glad you asked it. So Countryside is going to be, we believe, a $61 million project in total. Franklin, similar. We're going to rebuild both schools. We're figuring out right now if they're brand new schools or major renovations with additions. Countryside, I think, is almost certainly a brand new school. We'll demolish the current one, put up a new one. Franklin's still in process to figure it out. We're going to bond the projects. And so what you're, usually it's 30 years, maybe it'll be 25, depends what the bond market looks like. And what this override says is for all of us who are taxpayers, we're going to add on the cost annually of those bonds for those 25 or 30 years. And so that's the debt we're going to be paying for. Oddly enough, it's excluded from your taxes and just added on top of it. So we won't start bonding until construction. Construction usually lasts 2 or 3 years. So the full effect of the bonding, it won't even start. You won't, even if we vote yes, it doesn't show up on your tax bills for about 3 years from now, and it'll get feathered in on your tax bills, and they'll be there what feels like to me forever, 25 or 30 years, and then it disappears off the tax bills at that point. So those are tax exclusion overrides for the bonding for the schools. The other one, the operating override, you're going to feel it immediately. That $9 million of additional investment is going to show up on our taxes starting in July if we vote yes. It's $9 million spread out all over our taxpayers, and it's permanent. It's a one-time increase, and then we'll grow at the rate of growth of whatever our taxes grow at. And I'd really urge everybody, if you're going to take away one thing from tonight, go to the Newton website. It's newtonma.gov/override. There's a calculator there. Put in your address, and you can see exactly what it's going to cost you. Hope that helped.
It does. Okay, so one more question, and then I'll read my statement. So I don't understand Horace Mann up there, because I walk past Horace Mann all the time, and it looks like there's more money for Horace Mann, but it looks to me like Horace Mann has just been recently redone and is completed. So why are we adding more money to Horace Mann?
Turns out that we need an addition. The renovation is almost completely done. We need an addition. We've got really undersized auditorium, lunch area, libraries, and some of the classrooms. So it needs an addition in the back.
So I don't know about addressing. I just walk around the Horace Mann school there, and I know they've redone the whole thing. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, are you talking about the one on Albemarle?
Albemarle.
Or
well, by Albemarle.
the huge,
yeah, the Horace Mann school.
Oh, great question, Carrie. You figured that out.
I don't know about another Horace Mann.
So that's the old Horace Mann. We've moved Horace Mann to a different location, the former Carr School.
Okay.
And what's fabulous is our littlest wee ones are now, we completely renovated the old Horace Mann, which is completely done, for our preschool.
Oh, okay. I got confused between the
Thank you, Carrie.
The two Horace Manns. Okay. All right, so then I just have a brief statement. Okay. I live in West Newton, and I have for 48 years. I don't think anybody wants a tax increase. I know I don't. I'm retired, and I live on a fixed income, and I have to be very careful. It seems that this city is always raising taxes. Proposition 2.5, other overrides, and on and on and on. However, to put it in perspective, I love living here, and I feel very secure here. And I think for the most part, we have a well-run city. So when I see another proposed tax increase, I think one of the most important things to me is how much. And I appreciate the mayor just talking about the calculator. I appreciate the little calculator the city put in the city webpage. In my case, I pay about $1,000 a month in taxes. The calculator estimated that my tax increase would be 60 cents a day, which is $18 a month. I think for $18 a month, I really can't get too concerned. $18 a month, at least to me, is just in the noise level. I do, however, hope that the city has examined the budget situation carefully, looked at all the different alternatives, weighed all the pros and cons of all of them, and decided what's in the best interest of the city and its citizens, and reached this conclusion carefully, and that this tax increase is in the best interest of us all. Therefore, in my humble opinion, I guess I'll vote for it.
Thank you.
You spoke of growing needs for mental health counseling. Is that specific to the past years, what happened with COVID? Kids being away from school, routines being interrupted. Do you see that? Can you quantify what it means? Number of psychologists, number of people you've had to hire to help? Do you see that changing over time and decreasing, or is that a permanent level that will stay forever? Thank you.
So the question, as I heard it, had to do with, could we talk a little bit more about what we see as the root causes of the increased mental health needs in our schools and what we anticipate in terms of being able to lessen the degree of support over time, and to what extent do we see that as related to the pandemic? Does that capture it? Great. So I will say this. I will say that over the years prior to the pandemic, we did see rising mental health and behavioral needs in our schools. The pandemic exacerbated that. If you pick up any educational journal right now, that isn't a Newton-specific issue. That's an issue across the United States right now, where in every school department, they are working to find ways to support a higher need in terms of students' mental health supports. In the Newton Public Schools, we've been fortunate to be able to have positions such as our psychologists, social workers, social and emotional interventionists, and have piloted social and emotional coach roles to be able to work together as parts of a comprehensive team, working with teachers, working with administrators, working with all of the other academic supports within the building to be able to take a look at what are the child's needs, what is it that's going on for kids, what is it that they need in order to be successful at school. What is it, meeting with families and joining with families to be able to provide support and make linkages to with community resources when necessary. So those are now, as you might have seen with the quote from one of our principals. First of all, it's hard to know, right? It's hard, there's no crystal ball that says how quickly can we move beyond this. But what we know is that as a whole, right, not just children, not just Newton, adults are having a harder time with mental health needs as well. We're seeing a shortage of mental health supports in the community, and so the schools are absorbing a great deal of that work. So it's hard to foresee exactly how long it's going to take in order to meet the need. But I think what's very clear is what happens if we don't meet that need. In the absence of those supports, the impact not only for students who are struggling with mental health challenges, but all of their peers in that learning environment we can predict will be impacted.
I would just add one additional context to it, which is we think about mental health supports or mental health counseling in the context of, meeting with a therapist, something of that nature. The Newton Public Schools provides very little therapy and one-on-one counseling, mental health counseling to our students. So you also hear us talk about social and emotional supports. So as we think about the challenges that young people are facing in the middle of what some have described as a youth mental health crisis, we will help families, and our counselors will help refer students to outside counseling, the type of one-on-one counseling that we're most familiar with as adults. But a lot of that is about the work we have to do with students in the classroom and outside the classroom to help get them ready to learn and take advantage of the academic opportunities. So that can manifest itself in terms of students needing to speak to someone to get calmed down or to deal with their anxiety to go back into a classroom on a minute-to-minute basis. It may have to deal with helping two young people work out a disagreement or argument that before the pandemic, they had built up a lot of skills through social interactions and other things, and we're seeing more and more students come to school now that don't know how to do that or don't have enough experience. So we need another person to be able to help resolve a conflict before they can go back into their classroom and be ready to learn. So a lot of those social emotional supports, they're not mental health counseling, they're not what we typically think of as mental health, but they're related to the rise of the mental health needs of our students, and we do those things to facilitate the academic learning. And they do often involve additional staff working in the schools, additional time for our already very much strapped and stressed administrators and other support staff. So all of that leads to the need for more resources. I don't see that necessarily decreasing in the short term, and we hope in the long term as we create more interventions and support for kids to learn new skills and self-care and receive mental health counseling where appropriate outside of school, that we will see that start to fade, but that's very real for us right now and in the near future.
I think you make a good point, Toby, because it speaks to the need for the class size, why we try to keep class sizes in a reasonable range as well, right? When kids are well known, they get that kind of attention from their classroom teacher. When they're in an environment where they're helped to really build strong connections within the classroom, both on the social side of things, but also academically well supported within that classroom environment, that all helps to create that kind of environment where kids can thrive and get the kind of attention that they need. And I think that's important to highlight as well as it relates to overall well-being, our kids doing well, being healthy and thriving in school.
Could I add just one thing from a non-educator's point of view? Every single school now has at least one psychologist at each school building. Remember, we've got 15 elementary, 4 middle, and 2 high. At least one social worker, at least one school nurse, and a place like Newton North has multiples. What we've found, though, that even with all those supports and amazing educators, we're having sufficient number of our young people, our children, in crisis to such an extent that they actually need to be moved out of the school setting and quickly. We now have a full-time person from a great organization called Riverside who every weekday is here to respond to those really serious crisis situations, help that family and that student get to the right kind of, maybe not even the emergency room, right immediate support, and then work with that family to surround them with help. That's the kind of thing that the Newton Public Schools must do and are doing. That's the world we're living in.
Hey, thanks. Hi. So I'm relatively new to the community. My wife and I, with our 2 young kids, we actually moved from, and we had the opportunity to look at all communities locally, from Lexington to Concord to Wellesley to Weston, etc. And we actually landed on Newton. We said, we like it here. I won't bother you with all the details, but essentially it came down to quality schools and then proximity to the city, right? And so I'm kind of arriving to this debate a bit late. You guys have done a lot of work already, but here's what I'm struggling to reconcile. It's hard for me to understand how is it that we are even in a position that when I look at those numbers, right, I think like what you would like is about 280 to 282 million. And that's kind of the desired number. And then I think for the budget, there are two scenarios, one with override and one without the override. And I think the delta is about 4.5 million between the two. So I guess I'm struggling to reconcile, like if you go back to one of the slides that shows the overrides and the towns locally, so I spent quite a bit of time just learning more on paper, but also driving around and, visiting these communities. What I can tell you is while Watertown and Waltham have equally attractive location to both Cambridge and Boston, the schools are nowhere nearly as good as the rest of these communities. So I guess it pains me to understand, like, how are we even in this position where it's a question, will we be able to fund the NPS at the appropriate level? Whatever that level is, right? I'm really struggling to reconcile that, because to me, the driver for why I picked up and came and planted my family in Newton of all the other communities, and am choosing to pay the premium on the housing, which, by the way, relative to Lake Forest in Chicago, one of the top communities all around the country, it's twice as expensive here. And I can tell you schools are probably on par, if not a little worse than what we had. So I'm really, I'm not sure how can we afford to not fund the schools. If they start going down, I mean, you're headed in a direction of Waltham and Watertown, and I don't think that's what you want for Newton property values, community, and everybody else involved.
I'm going to speak about a little bit about the funding of our schools in the Commonwealth. So we have what's called the foundation formula for schools. So if you are in I'm just going to use the term, a needier community, whether it be socioeconomic, whatever the reason is, the state has a formula, and that's called equity in education, to make sure that our children have a certain level. I was actually in a very large urban district, and we were very reliant on state funding, about 80%. So I'm not going to give that whole lesson. I'm happy to talk to you about it someday. And about 20% from our city to fund our schools. I think the difference in places, and I can look up there, and again, I told you I studied this, the Needham, the Wellesleys, the Weston, the Newtons, is you rely very heavily. It's almost like flipping that percentage. So almost 80% of your funding, and really more, I'm sure the mayor can tell you that, is from your taxpayer dollars, from your business, from your revenues. It's a formula the mayor can certainly speak to. And it is interesting when I look at the wealthier communities, once you reach that so-called foundation, you are allowed to do whatever you want in your community if you have the funding. If you want to have lower class sizes, that is an expense. You go above that so-called foundation. If you want to have a certain initiatives, you want to bring in a new reading curriculum, you want to bring in, advanced technology or whiteboards in your classrooms or any of those things, you are able to obviously raise those funds. So every town, it's a complicated formula, or city, it's a little bit different. But I think when you look at, and I started out by saying, you are a premier district. There are expectations when we talked about the class size, when we talked about the supports in the classroom, when we talked about the resources that we have for our students, the opportunities for clubs, for extracurricula. You moved here for those very reasons is what you're really saying. I studied it. This is the type of community that I want to have my children educated in. So again, I don't know if that helped with kind of understanding how we fund our schools, and the mayor can talk particularly to Newton.
Let me try to unpack a few more, but you may need some follow-up questions. City of Newton, our total revenues, our tax dollars plus what we get from the state and everything else will go up about 3.5% next year. I've already told Liam Hurley, our CFO, school CFO, you can count on additional $9 million for next year's budget. We're at 262 right now. Count on $271 million. Welcome to Newton. I'm so glad you picked us. And we have exactly what you want, because this is a community whose #1 priority has always been our children and our schools. We're committed, we're all in, and yeah, we've got a great location right near Boston. So the issue that we're struggling with is we know the budget next year is going up by $9 million, and guess what? It isn't enough. That's why we've put forward, I raised my hand and did what that gentleman said. No one likes to have their taxes go up. But I knew this was so important and so right. I said, yep, I'm going to the voters and saying, support our children, support their future. And there's another $4.5 million in the operating budget, getting the NPS budget up to about 275 or 6, depending on how you round it. Could the schools even use more than that? They could, you bet. But it is incumbent upon us to manage every single taxpayer dollar thoughtfully and carefully. And to respond to the gentleman earlier, we try really hard to make sure we're investing every dollar thoughtfully and efficiently and effectively. So the budget's going up, but we really need, in addition to my allocation of the $9 million, I need our voters to allocate an additional $4.5 million. And we can really do great things in our schools and across the city if that happens.
Yeah, thank you both for providing additional perspective. I guess like I'll tack on to the last comment. So like I'm also trying to understand, like I'm a finance guy, University of Chicago educated. You know, there's a concept of economic value added, or EVA. So like if you think as a corporate manager and where do you allocate funds, you're gonna typically allocate to the highest yield, highest uses, etc. So as I think about the Newton's overall budget, which I'll admit and I'll concede to not having the depth of knowledge on the budget, but is it a function of maybe those funds being allocated in a variety of directions where maybe they don't have the equal yield? And I really can't think of a better place than the schools to be the priority to get funded first, and then whatever overrides we do for whatever any other reason, no problem. But I'm going to go back to what I said. I am struggling to reconcile how is it that the schools are sort of last on this list where we are going to do the override so that we can fully fund the schools. Like how come we were not funding them to begin with?
I love that question. Actually, the schools are first. What's interesting, 65% of all our tax dollars go to educating our kids. Everything else comes after that. That's where I always start when I build the budget each year. Okay, what's the NPS allocation? I do have to look at debt and retiree health, retiree stuff. And then everything else, when you call 911, you bet you want police, fire, and ambulance to respond. You do want, if we ever have snow again, you do want the snow plowed. You want the streets to be in better condition than they are today. You want our athletic fields to even be better cared for. You know, we've lost like half of our street trees. There's lots of things, and I'll just mention one thing. The budget for the Newton Public Schools this year is $262 million, 11,700 kids. We have more seniors, and they are growing at a faster level than all our children. The budget for the senior services is less than $1 million. I really feel strongly and feel positive and good about allocating in this override an additional $500,000 to provide services to our largest demographic.
Yeah.
So it's happy to talk. We should talk.
Yeah, would love to. Would love to.
I'm too a finance person, and that's my background. So let's move on to other people. I'll give you my business card.
Great.
We'll keep talking.
Yeah, would love to.
Hi. I was wondering if you could go into a little more detail on the proposed cuts to the school budget, and in particular, I guess, two areas. With the last time that these when the financial shortfalls began to become apparent last spring, things on the table were seeming more like literacy coaches and math coaches and school counselors and those kind of staff cuts. And I was wondering what we would be seeing in the classroom. More specifically, you touched on clubs and athletics, but it feels like there might be more direct impacts to the students in those ways. And also on the building maintenance front, Superintendent, when you came to our school, we were talking about flooding, and literally the next day my kids came home and said, oh, there was a bucket in the middle of the gym floor today, and it was quite the excitement. So I know we've got deferred maintenance. There are many schools that are not on the renovations list that need repairs and need attention. So we're currently in a somewhat of a freeze on spending. What can we be looking for continued either cuts or freezes on that front as well?
Was this Mason Rice?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, and we're really not really far ahead, but we did have a head start. This is something that we have been talking about probably since I came on during the summer. Obviously making the decision about the override, looking at some of the costs are a surprise to us. Like when you saw that OSD rate of 14%. And it is a cost that is an additional $1.8 million in our budget. We understand what it is needed for. We want to support that, but you can imagine what that does to an already struggling budget. So when we talk, and your question to me first of all was, can you go into a little more detail on the cuts? So can I say this to everybody? You did hear me say that if the override passes, I am really optimistic. We'll have to look at our structural deficit. We're continuing to look at that in many areas. We're also looking at efficiencies, ways to stay away from some of the very things that I'll talk about right now. So we are busy at work. When you look at these very people up here, they are spending hours, with their staff looking at a budget book that is this thick. When you talk about, $271 million budget, we are looking at everything that we can. Are these technology programs that we use in the classroom? How much is the usage? What can we do to take a look at things, even in our budget, that it could be rolling over class sizes because of the demographics that we talked about, and we do this every year. Do we need to have 4 second grades, or can we go to 3 and still have those optimal class sizes? So these are things we're doing, first of all, regardless of the budget. What is becoming very, very difficult, and we are looking during the month of March. We do not have another school committee meeting in February. We have one, I believe, March 1st and March 13th. We will be preparing and sharing percentages. And one of the things when you look at a $6 to $8 million possible deficit is that's why you see all of this up here. So again, we're looking at percentages across the board where every part of our district feels a little bit of budget pain. It could be everywhere from custodial services. It can be everywhere from the very people that support the superintendent. It will touch on every aspect, and we have this listed here so you can see that the last thing is the classroom, because this is what you expect when this gentleman talks about having researched, come to Newton for the kind of education you want for your children. We want to make sure, and especially I keep talking about this challenging time, to make sure that we maintain that richness in your classrooms of resources, of making sure a teacher it makes a difference. And again, you're asking for detail that we are working on. I mean, I'm looking at spreadsheets as I stand here. I left my office and I was sending notes to my staff. We have a meeting tomorrow, probably a 3 or 4 hour long meeting to continue to refine, to look, to have discussions, to discuss the impact. This is a lot of work to obviously prepare this budget, you know, to work with our school committee and to come up with what we're calling a balanced budget. It'll be a whole lot easier if we have that immediate infusion of $4.5 million in our operating budget. So again, this is detailed work. We're certainly going to be very, very transparent and share that with the community at large. But I want to be, I keep saying the word optimistic. I am optimistic when I hear the gentleman over here talk about, you know, being a retiree. I'm going to be joining you very soon. And when you talk about, again, you know, wanting to support the very thing that makes such a difference to the value of your homes. You know, I've had people out there saying to me, I have children in the schools, I want to be able to talk to my neighbors, you know, that this is important, you know, whether you're a retiree, you know, whether you're, again, a grandparent, a neighbor, you know, what do you want for your community and for the children? So certainly the value of your homes is probably one, especially during this time. And I know the mayor will address this. This is a difficult time. You know, we understand that it's a sacrifice, but we'll be able to get back to you. You asked another question. You asked about detail. You asked about maintenance, building maintenance. I'm gonna let Liam talk to that.
Sure, thank you. And again, you know, we do continue to have, you know, like any district, so we've got almost 2.5 million square feet, and the city has been and embarked on a, you know, an ambitious, you know, renovation plan. So starting off with their buildings of Ainger, then Zervis, then Cabot. We now have a great pipeline in place, and just so you don't hear, and so this gentleman doesn't, he may not know. So NECP moved into the old Horace Mann. So that just happened in January. We then actually have Lincoln Elliott in September 2025. We're also planning to do Horace Mann. We are also then obviously Franklin and Countryside. So we have a really, I would say, probably outside of Boston, we have as aggressive a pipeline of new buildings as any community in Massachusetts. I'm not positive of that, but I'm not aware of another community that this has this many schools going on at one time. And again, some of that is obviously override funding. We need to continue to maintain our buildings that are not on that list, Mason Rice being one, Pierce being another one, Burr being another one. Even Newton North, even a new building like this has issues. We have roof leaks. Water comes in. Water's an issue for us everywhere. But we need to maintain those. We've got a whole work order system. We've got great contracts in place. We rely on the city. They've got a public buildings department. We have a facilities department. We've got a great custodial crew as well. You know, Kathleen talked about, is that an area? Do we need to reduce our custodial staffing? We have about 90 staff spread across all our schools. We have a night shift that runs here. We would need to take a look at that. So, you know, work closely with Jake. We do a lot of work as well, and one of the areas that when we've struggled with the budget in the past is we have lowered the maintenance budget. It is an area that we've typically actually overspent by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. In this last year's budget, we took kind of a fake cut. We cut the maintenance budget by $410,000, but the city is actually covering those expenses this year. That goes back to that one time. We need to make up that $410,000 in our budget to become whole again, just in that account. But those summer projects are really important. That's where we'll go through and we'll do upgrades, we'll do stairways, we'll do bathrooms, we'll renovate floors, we'll do bleachers, we'll actually put in new floors for gyms, we'll paint spaces. We're not taking a 1950 building and making it look perfect, but we'll make cosmetic changes. We'll also make life safety changes. If there's a stairwell that's out, if there's a doorway that's no longer working or appropriate anymore, we'll make those changes. The requests come in, and there are millions of dollars. We need to parse through them and actually kind of whittle that down to a number that we can manage. But at the same time, it is a juggling act for us because we need to look at, do we want to cut staff or do we want to hit that maintenance line item? We want to continue with all those things, but in the past we've made that difficult decision that we want to keep our staff, and you can hear those reasons why we need to keep these critical staff. But at the same time, I'm with you. We need to keep maintaining these buildings. It's critical, and it's where our students learn. It's where our students thrive. Having a good, having a warm and welcoming environment is really critical. This past weekend, we had building checks both days, just on that 7-degree or minus 9-degree day. We were in there. We did have a few issues, but we caught them, and we had vendors come in, replace them. There were not many critical issues that were, impacting any students.
If I could just add one more detail to the first part of the question. The reason why we have the list up here that includes classroom and school personnel as a possibility for being cut in the event of a $6 to $8 million budget gap, the reason why we have our senior leadership team here and our principals is we're all deeply concerned about the impact a $6 to $8 million cut will have on the educational core of what we do. 89% of our budget is personnel, primarily educators. We will not be able to close that gap without having to reduce the number of educators we have, the number of classrooms, increasing class size, and having a significant impact on what happens within the classroom and all those supplemental supports that we've talked about over the course of the evening, as well as the extracurricular and some of those very high-profile programs that we know and love that would also be impacted. So that's why we're here tonight. That's why this event is happening, based on the concern that we have as educators about the impact of having to close a budget gap that size. So we hope that that message is coming through loud and clear and will be able to be shared with others in the community as well.
Hi. So I have 3 kids in Newton Public Schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And I went to good public schools as a kid. So I first of all, just wanted to say education, in my mind, is super, super important. So very appreciative of everything you guys do in the school district. I'm also supportive of, like, getting the additional funding when it's necessary. The only thing is this caught me a little bit by surprise because maybe like lots of Newton residents, you see your tax bill, your property tax bill going up based on the growth in the assessed value, as well as, of course, I think there's a 2.5% increase each year. So I was curious, and I looked at some of the numbers just off the Newton website, Newton City website. And so looking at the last 5 years for the schools, the percent spending per pupil increase over the last 5 years, I'll just give you some of the numbers. There's 4.3% last year, then 5.0 before that, 8.9% before that, 4.5% before that, 4.2% before that. So these are pretty sizable percentage increases, given that I know inflation recently has spiked, but if you look at the last 10 years, the average inflation rate's been 1.8%. And I looked then, I was curious about the city budget, and so, the current budget planned is $480 million, but 10 years ago it was the budget was like $312 million, I think, it looks like from this chart. So that's well over a 50% growth in 10 years. And so looking at the average growth rate over that 10 years, it's 4.5%. Again, compared to 1.8% for inflation. So we know that, from economists, that labor rates and things like that, which labor, of course, is the biggest component, but, need to stay kind of in line with inflation. They, when labor goes up, drives inflation, et cetera. So I'm trying to understand, the timing of this just seems odd. I mean, because what if it was not, if the last 10 to 15 years weren't a period of major real estate assessed value growth, because we know homes have gotten very expensive here in Newton. A lot of homes have been replaced with very large, much larger homes that create a larger tax revenue per home. And then we have more, some multifamily deployments. So it just caught me off guard that, given the growth we've had, and also from the charts here that show the growth in spending compared to the average American, the average Newton resident, perhaps. And so it's a tough time, right, for people that maybe are fixed income, inflation's rising, and now they're getting a higher tax bill. So it just concerns me that, what's going to happen then if there's a downturn in the housing market like we're starting to see, and what if that keeps going for 5, 6, 7 years? What kind of an override will we have to do then?
Let me see if I can unpack a few things that you've said. First of all, it is a really terrible economic cycle. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, filling up your gas tank, a carton of eggs, you name it. And I think on top of that, the economic uncertainty. So we know what we're facing today, and we're worrying justifiably about what tomorrow will look like. Layoffs in certain sectors. This is a tough time. So I do understand what a tricky time this is for me to go to everybody and say, I'd love you to increase your tax bill. Granted. You got one basic thing wrong that almost all Newtonians got wrong, and let me see if I can make sure everybody understands that. You said the assessed values of my home, most of our homes, is going way up, therefore our taxes go up. That's not how it works. What's happened as our assessed values do keep going up, it's astonishing. There's a housing shortage in Greater Boston, and this is a really desirable place to live. Our tax rate keeps going down. When our assessed value, we have the 17th lowest tax rate in the Commonwealth here, and it went down again this year. So don't think just because the value of your house went up yet again this year that your taxes automatically go up because of your assessed value. The tax rate went down. But so why the heck are your taxes going up? There's two parts to it. We live in Massachusetts. In the early 1980s, Proposition 2.5 was passed. For all towns, all cities, our property taxes in total are only allowed to go up 2.5% unless the voters vote for an override. But in addition to the Prop 2.5%, there's one other thing that goes on. For all cities and towns, if you happen to just build an addition on your home, or you just fixed up your kitchen, that growth in the value of your house directly related to the investment you made, that's called new growth. Plus on Washington Street, remember how we now have Trio? That used to be a different development there. It got knocked down, and Mark Development came in and built a new building. That's also called new growth because the taxable value of that new building is more than the old one. Same thing, we have about 100 houses every year that get demolished and a new house goes up, often much bigger than the old one. That's also new growth. Our new growth also increases our tax base, usually about 1%, sometimes it's 1.5% a year. So we've got the 2.5% from Prop 2.5 plus 1, maybe sometimes 1.5. Liam, can you put up the slide of the override? I want to show you one thing. You have to read the fine. I wrote this. See, way down at the bottom, there's a little asterisk there. Because you notice Watertown and Waltham have had no overrides in the last 20 years. And I agree with this gentleman. Our schools, by the way, I am happy to say, and I'll say it to the mayor of Waltham and the city manager over in Watertown, we've always prioritized our schools. We've got better schools, but they haven't had overrides. Why? Watertown and Waltham both have higher amounts of that new growth. Therefore, they haven't needed the override. So if you look in the last 4 fiscal years, Watertown's new growth was 4.85% over those 4 years. Waltham's was 2.58%. Newton, we're at 1.65%. So we're a fully developed city, and I would say the city council is very careful about approving new developments. They have to work for us as a community. They're just not going after the dollars, and we have lower new growth. But That's a long lesson in how tax is, but I think you and I may have talked before. I'm happy to keep talking with you. Maybe it was somebody else who asked the same question. And some of your numbers, I think, are a little off, but they're directionally, but happy to, again, I'll give you my business card, happy to talk more. Hope that helped.
I might just jump in as well, just on that per pupil numbers, and I might want to take a look at the numbers as well. So the per pupil is actually something that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, gets from each of the school districts. So we supply that in what's called our EOR, end-of-year report. We have to do that every year. It's audited, and that's actually a report that we do with all revenue and all expenditures. Just note that for a few years, and I just want to take a look at the numbers, for a few years, DESE was not including the out-of-district tuition. They felt they couldn't compare that to different schools, so I just want to take a look at that. And then secondly, that number includes all this grant money that were included in there, includes all fees. So it's not our operating budget, which is really what we're talking about, the $262 million. We've been in this 3.5 or so range increase every year. That's the number that's, I think, from my perspective, obviously critical. There's a large amount of money that we even report in the end-of-year report that is attributable, that the city actually covers for us, almost $30 to $35 million of debt service payments. The city actually covers our water payment. There's all sorts of other fees that are actually other costs that are actually not even in our budget that we report. That per pupil, we don't have it tonight. We had some other slides comparing our per pupil to many of these other similar communities, and we were very much squarely, I think, in the middle. There were a few districts that were, Cambridge was maybe $35,000 per student. We were around $23,000, I think, for FY21, 22. A few districts were lower than us. Belmont was lower than us. Brookline was slightly higher than this, but we were really right in the middle with many of our peer communities. So be happy to look at that data as well.
I'll mention one other thing that I'm really proud of for our community. We did have a spike in Newton Public School costs when I came in as mayor, January 1st, 2018. I remember in the inauguration speech, I said, we're going to full-day kindergarten. We were one of the last communities that had half-day kindergarten. Makes no sense educationally or for our families. So the Newton Public Schools figured it out. We have small class sizes in our kindergartens with a teacher and an aide in each one of them. That was a definite increase in cost, a surge forward. And I carved out the funding to do it, and thank goodness we did. That's something to be proud of, that increase in cost.
Thank you for sharing this. This is not actually the DESE per pupil. This is our own chart that we had put out there. It's from last year's budget. So this also takes into this is helpful and this is good. This is actually also taking into account basically the drop in enrollment that we've had. So it's not. I thought you were referencing the DESE report. So this is a little bit different than what. So this is helpful to take a look at. Essentially, we've gone up in our cost per pupil. It takes our total number of students and takes our our budget. The critical point, though, to take a look at is what is our budget increasing at? Our budget is increasing at approximately 3.5%. So to compare it per pupil, the critical part is what is our actual budget, numerator, denominator growing each year, and that's been that 3.5%. As our total number of students has decreased, it does show an increase, obviously, in the total increase per pupil. But the actual allocation has been that 3.5 or so range. But we can chat a little bit more as well offline.
So I'll repeat your question back so everybody could hear it. So what's the sustainable rate of increase? Because Kathy Smith in one of her very first slides said we're trying to maintain the good work we're doing and having a sustainable budget. The city budget as a whole, 84% of it are our property taxes, and then we get some state aid and some other things. We predict, we've got a forecast book. You'll love looking at that one. You're a finance nerd, too. Look at the October financial forecast booklet. I'll tell you how to get there. Is 3.5%. We've got a bit of a growth higher growth next year and then right back to 3.5%. So the Newton Public Schools, I will always allocate the full amount of growth to the Newton Public Schools, but we've got to live within our means, and that's about 3.5%, unless we go to you guys and say, we have a really good reason for you to consider going above that rate of growth through approving an override. And that's in the hands of our residents. And Mayor Warren in 2013, when he proposed that override, said, I promise that I'm not coming back for 5 years at least. And I'm making the same promise. We're going to be fine for the next 5 years, but 6 years from now, we might be right back at this. It is true.
Can I also say, in having discussions with other superintendents dealing with, many of the same challenges or the same challenges we're dealing with, when we look at their overall budget for this year, as they're trying to retain additional staff on board, making sure they have the resources, it is really close to over 5%. So, Liam, you were looking at averages, again, from districts, and it was close to 5 or 6%, some higher, very few lower, but it is just not unusual. And I believe with that override, it brings us to 5.2?
5.2. 5.2 would be with the override percentage. Yeah, a number of districts, preliminary estimates for a number of districts is in that 5 to 6% range. The rate of growth assumed in our budget forecast, thinking about multi-year, is the 3.5%, as the mayor said. There is not a school district out there that doesn't want more. Newton is the same, and we're always going to advocate for more. That is the nature of every school district in the country at this point. The needs are there. We do need to live within our means. We do need to present a balanced budget. We're going to continue to advocate, but this override is certainly going to be a real big step for us in terms of meeting the needs we've got in FY24 and beyond.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you to the panel for taking your time to meet with us this evening. I'm a parent of 2 NPS students and 1 graduate, and I don't actually mind paying more taxes when there's a real need. However, when the city is asking me and parents like myself for more money for schools, we have a hard time separating this ask from the fact that I and many other parents feel that NPS has lost its way, that we no longer focus on academic excellence, and that the recent school rankings reflect that. We can look at the rankings for both Newton's high schools, which are very concerning. And the recent parent survey revealed that an astonishing 70% of all parents are not happy with the direction of NPS. And yet, when I and others asked our school committee to address this issue, it became apparent that it's probably not going to get addressed, or it's not being taken seriously, and we as parents feel dismissed by this. And I know that I'm speaking for many parents because I've been out in the community and talking to my friends, and we all feel the same way. So when, Mayor Fuller, you come to us and you ask us for more funding, we're happy to give it to you, but we need to feel like our concerns are also being addressed and we're being listened to and taken seriously. So that's my comment. Thank you.
I know I'm going to be joined by my team, who have been here certainly longer than I have. I have obviously, heard some of those concerns. I will tell you, and I'm not sure if you're able to watch the deliberations or the school committee meetings that we have certainly had. So we've had very deep discussions talking about all the challenges that we're talking to you about this evening, but also looking at the Newton Public Schools and making sure that we are certainly listening to our parents. So when you talk about excellence and you talk about equity, and that seems to be a discussion people are having. And coming here, and last evening, actually, even at Newton North High School, I was unable to make it because we were actually on a call with parents from the Day Middle School. But I know there was a presentation. I actually heard it was excellent. And actually during our conversation last night with Principal Jackie Mann at the Day Middle School, to hear the deep learning that your children are doing, you know, the research involved, the opportunities that they have. You know, everybody has personalized learning. So whether you are a student that has high potential and is able to be pushed to reach that potential, you are having those opportunities. And I would ask you to please watch our school committee meetings. The other night we talked about, again, fine arts for everybody, integrated from your top performers who are going to be on Broadway to your students that might not have those skills but want to be up here on this stage. And I've seen it. I've been to some of those performances. So again, when you look at the whole child, you know, and you look at what you're certainly offering, I do question, and I understand we did an MCAS performance. There were a dip in, you know, a number of areas. We're really seeing this all around, and really we're coming out of a very challenging 3 years. But here's what I will promise to you. I won't be your superintendent. We're really excited about your superintendent search process that have named finalists that are going to be interviewed next week. You'll have an opportunity to actually, first of all, watch those finalists. The school committee, I believe, will be selecting, I think it's next Friday at this point. But one of the things that we're committed to doing, and I can't tell you the date of the school committee meeting, but as an interim superintendent, the school committee said, superintendent, there are some things that we want to make sure we're sharing with our constituents, with our parents, with our stakeholders. We are looking, and we have actually a presentation on March 2nd with my team, something called, and this is not new, it's called Portrait of a Graduate. So not just talking about your expectations for your high school students, but what are you expecting when your little kids come at 5 years old into your kindergarten classes? What do you expect those youngsters to learn as they transition into grade 1, grade 2, and beyond? This is going to be work that's going to take a couple of years, and it's really going to be in the hands of your new superintendent and the leadership team. We're also looking to put forward, and I came on board and the school committee made it clear that they want to support certainly our system-wide goals, but want to make sure that we're looking at data, we're looking at, you know, whether it is a test score, and there's a lot of questions about that, but how are we measuring our kids? There's lots of different ways to measure our students. I'd ask you to look at a program, and I think we'll be looking at it, called Challenge Success out of Stanford University. You want to make sure you're educating the whole child, giving them certainly many opportunities. So that when talking about data, every school committee meeting since, I can't even remember, early September, we have been putting forward programs. We've been showing you data. We've been talking about whether it, again, is decreasing a gap a student might have had in learning during the pandemic, or those students that can move beyond. We are continually talking about that. We're going to produce something called the Newton Annual Report. If you look at some districts, they call it a district report card. They call it a progress report. And we're going to share that widely with the community. And there may be challenges in there. There may be things that we have to look at, we need to address. So again, we are being very transparent. Your new superintendent will do an entry plan when they come on board. They will be out there talking to all the stakeholders, whether you're community members, whether you're parents, whether you're the very students that go to these schools. I did an interview 2 days ago with your students from Newton South, and I'm going to be doing one, I think, with your students from Newton North. It was the Lion's Roar. Do I have that right? And I just had the other students. And I have had interviews with journalists from all over. And I will tell you, it was the best interview I've ever had. They were well prepared. Their depth, it wasn't just one question to Dr. Smith, it was a follow-up, and I could tell they knew the answers ahead of time. So again, I question, you know, when I've been around a long time, and I'm proud of where I come from. But truthfully, the opportunities that you are providing to, and I don't know why that's out there. And people have said to me, Superintendent, there's frustration. We didn't bring our kids back, you know, quick enough during the pandemic. And there are people that lost faith, or I am telling you this. It was a very challenging time. And I apologize if there was any kind of an inconvenience, but this right now, we are doing wonderful, wonderful work for our students. So we are asking for that support from them. So please make your decisions as you gather information about if you go to that last slide. So I want to put students first every time we are out there, because sometimes we lose sight. And I'm so renewed when I hear and energized when I hear somebody say that I don't mind paying those tax dollars even if I'm on a fixed income, because it makes a difference. These are our students. This is who we are in the Newton Public Schools. So, please, when you're, again, making your decisions, make sure that we're putting this generation of students first, and we will not let you down, I guarantee it.
If I could also add, I hear you. You are not alone, and I'm not alone. We hear you. A lot of parents are really rocked right now. They're questioning education. They rarely are questioning individual teachers, by the way. It's amazing when they have a ton of confidence in teachers, but they are wondering about education. I think I've had the chance to be at all the school committee meetings. Literally, I think I've missed 2 in the last 6 years. Our educators are changing things up. They're doing tracking differently. They're doing grading differently. They're doing writing differently. They're teaching math differently. And I think a bunch of parents are going, I'm not sure what's going on here, and are questioning. I actually know that if you had a chance to spend time with Toby or Aisha or Renee or Kathy, or we've got a middle school principal here, an elementary school principal, the commitment to academic excellence is complete. And what they're trying to do is make sure it's for every single kid in the school. So I hear you. The commitment is there. My commitment is there. And I think our educators are committed to it. And I just encourage whoever, you said you have 2 kids, I don't know if they're in the same school or different schools, see if you can somehow find some time to talk to either the principal or whoever the right person is and say, I need a full hour. I know this is you're under pressure, but I've got a lot of serious questions, and I really need somebody to talk to and hear me out and answer me.
If I could add just one thing to that. I know last night on this stage, you mentioned, Dr. Smith, there's a presentation by the leadership team at Newton North about the focus on academic excellence and instruction and other aspects of the school and what that means. And I understand this topic came up again of the survey results from the superintendent survey feedback. And I know a number of the parents who were there said, oh, well, we didn't respond to that survey. We felt confident in the superintendent's search process. So I think the survey, the 70% that you referenced, is a subset of Newton parents. I actually went back to a survey we did last year of a very high percentage of high school parents who responded, 80% of whom responded positively to how was your child's academic experience this year, and similarly high percentages when asked about their child's extracurricular and athletic experiences in their high schools. So we do know, and we want to engage with families that don't feel our schools are headed in the right direction, and we hear from tons of families and have other survey results talking about folks who feel really good about what's happening in their schools. And we always know we need to do better. We want to, if you're concerned about how your child is doing, we want to talk to you and figure out how we can meet their needs better. Those are conversations, as you said, Mayor Fuller, we look forward to having. I also know if you feel we're not heading in the right direction as schools, we're going to be even less able to change course with less resources. So if you see this as a referendum on the direction of the schools, I think that's the wrong place to have your voice heard. If you want to talk to your elected leaders or to any of us who help run the school system, we're happy to do that. But we're going to need these resources to avoid the significant cuts and impact to the core of what we do, whatever your opinion is about how we're doing that, to be effective. So I encourage everybody to keep that in mind as well. And again, happy to talk to you or any parents that have concerns about how their kids' needs are being met in our schools.
Thank you. I had a question about rates of inflation since Prop 2.5 passed and numbers and things like that, but I do feel called to comment a little bit on maybe the percentage of parents that don't feel that Newton has lost its way from the perspective of our kids. I am also a mother of 2 children that are in the Newton Public Schools. I have kids that are both wonderful. They're incredibly different from each other. And in a way, I feel like I have the privilege of seeing how academic excellence plus equity works. I've got a child who is, brilliant in a very traditional way. She can, read anything, high level, do all the math, always scores like all the best on all the test scores. Teachers have wonderful things to say about her all the time. And then I have another child who is fantastic, amazing, and on the autism spectrum. And both of my kids have been so incredibly well served by Newton so far. In the past 48 hours, I've had, one child come to me talk about, doing a really deep dive into Animal Farm in 8th grade at Brown Middle School. I have another, and then my other daughter, was having a challenging day one day, and I got an email from her teacher in the middle of the school day to let me know that she was having a tough time and what the folks in her classroom were doing to address that and to seek my guidance on what might help. The fact that both of those things can happen in the same school district, that I have first name basis relationships, not only with individual teachers for my children, but also with the principals and leadership of my schools, is just a gift. I'm not from here originally. I came from a very challenged public school system, so much so that my family put me in private school for all of my education, and had a great education, thankful for it, but I feel like my tax dollars are very well served here, and I am 100% behind the override. And I guess I'll get back to my original question about whether you guys can maybe comment a little bit about our unique system that we have here in Massachusetts with Proposition 2.5. And the idea that, we are sort of been stuck with a 3.5% increase year over year since 1980. And what does that maybe match up with in terms of costs and inflation in other places that aren't struggling under, I'm not going to say struggling under 2.5, but I don't know if there's maybe some talking that we can do there, because I think we've talked about budget numbers in very granular detail. I'm very grateful for the fact that you guys are such experts in it. But maybe zooming back a little bit for those of us who are not as deep into the granular aspects of it to maybe explain. I think originally there was a gentleman who had a question about how do we get here. Maybe we could understand a little bit more about, zooming back to the past, God, it's almost been 40 years. How did we get here with this system, if that makes sense? And thank you.
Okay, how many hours do we have? I'd say big picture. I actually, in the last month, actually looked at the CPI for the last 50 years. It's really interesting. And I also thought to myself, boy, did I envy the previous mayor, Seti Warren. There was really low inflation for a while there, but there was growing enrollment in the Newton Public Schools, so he had different challenges. Welcome to my life, a pandemic and inflation. Okay, we all have challenges. So there's also what is real in our community. We have residents who have really high expectations. So now when we redo our streets, we just don't pave them anymore. We fix the sidewalks, we put in the stormwater stuff, we think about where the bike lane can go. That's called complete streets approach. The cost to redo our streets is now more expensive. We now have higher expectations for everything in this city. Again, welcome to my life. I signed up for this job, just so you know. I'm happy to be doing it. But everybody understandably wants more. So we have expanded what the role of a city is today compared to 40 years ago. I gave you the school example. We used to have half-day kindergarten for decades and decades and decades. And that started with kids going home for lunch in a more traditional households where mom was home and fed lunch to the kids. Life has really changed, and it's gotten more complicated, and we just expect, as we should, a lot out of our city. So I'll try tracking the CPI versus the growth in revenues or tax dollars. My guess is the growth in tax dollars is higher than the CPI. Though, you know, all of them will be a little wavy. And that's because we as a community decide what we want our city and our schools to do. But it'll be higher than the CPI.
Just from my side, I would just have a kind of a couple of comments. I can't give you 40-year history. I think what I've seen I'm coming up on about 7 years, and I think there's 4 or 5 things kind of in confluence here that we talk about in this slide. There's a few other factors. So we talked about the growing student need. I think everyone knows how real that is. That's absolutely critical. We talk about rising costs and expenses. That has been particularly acute really since the pandemic, and obviously the inflation that we've been experiencing, the whole nation is experiencing. Public buildings is really trying to manage obviously these building projects and looking at the cost of steel. You should hear the conversations we have even on wood. We see that as well in the schools and our supplies. We also see it in our personnel. Over the last number of years, our cost of our personnel has grown. We're in collective bargaining right now. I'm not able to talk about where we are, but that has been an area and that's been a focus for us, and that's also why we retain and attract so many great staff. We have also been using this one-time money. Add this combination of things together. And then if you add, and I won't go back, I keep flipping around, go back to the fact that we have not had an override in 10 years. So this will be the second one, I guess, in 20 years. Many of the districts have come back to the well many more times than we have. So you add all those factors up. I think there's a few other factors as well that are involved with that. But add all those factors up, and you've got a situation where we are becoming a bit of a pressure cooker, where this is boiling over. We need to do something about it. And so if you don't do something about it, then you need to basically look at what is our
I just have a quick question. When we moved here in 1998, our son was going to first grade at Countryside. And he went through Countryside, and he went through Brown, and he went through South, and now he's 30. And a year or two into when we moved here, one of the neighbors was talking about they wanted to redo Countryside. And here we are 24 years later, and you still don't have money to redo Countryside. They put that thing that he did the third grade in out in the yard. But when I go into there to vote, I don't see much that's new.
So Countryside desperately needs to be invested in, and it has for a while. We have a list, and we do it really thoughtfully. The problem is we've had a lot of schools that needed work. So we have a master plan, and I was a city councilor. I was first on the Ainger School Building Committee, then the Zervis School Building Committee, then the Ainger School Building Committee. We did those with the 2013 override dollars. With your tax dollars, we have done, while I've been here, we've done the addition over at Day Middle School, and then we just did the ribbon cutting for the early childhood program with our normal tax dollars. Next up, we're almost done with the design for the Lincoln Elliott Elementary School. And Countryside's next with Franklin on the list, along with Horace Mann. And yep, just like in 2013, we needed your help to pay for Zervis, Cabot, and Ainger. We need your help to pay for Countryside, Franklin, and Horace Mann. And that is normal to go to folks and say, for these big major capital projects, we can't do it all within the normal debt capacity of the city. But you're right, we need to do Countryside. Yes, I would argue it's probably depressing. Your son could go back to Countryside tomorrow and it will look probably worse than when he was there.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. Again, we are certainly out in the schools. We're available if there are any follow-up questions. Please continue to watch our school committee meetings and our deliberation about this very important topic. Again, please reach out to any of us if you have additional questions.
Thank you all.
Oh, thanks, everybody. You're good to come.